Welcome back to Bonnie's Basketball Now alongside Louie, Genovese, and Jaeline Valdez. I'm Anthony Goss. A rough week for the Bonnies. They have a chance to bounce back against George Washington Sunday afternoon at the RC. Let's get into it. So the Bonnies, they do host the Colonials this weekend, and they need a rebound in the Riley Center. They are currently on a 3-game losing streak. GW seeks to break in their own 2-game losing streak. Their best player, talk about James Bishop IV. We're going to get more to him in a minute. The Bonnies and the Colonials, they continue to jockey for position in the A10 standings. Sunday's game is a pivotal one for the Bonnies to hold their spot in the A10 standings. Last time these two teams played, the Bonnies mopped the floor with GW, and that might be an understatement. Jared Holmes led the way, scoring 18 points. Kyle Lofton adding 10 assists. The Bonnies dominated George Washington 88-41. The teams have not met since then, a couple factors going into that. That indicates a lot of change since that first matchup. The one constant from then to now, well, we just mentioned him a few minutes ago, James Bishop IV. James Bishop leads the A10 in points per game, averaging 21 points and 5 assists, and he fuels the Colonials' offensive attack. Bishop posted 23 points against George Mason in a loss Wednesday night. Bonaventure, they're going to need to prevent a similar output from him tomorrow. So Louie, I'll go to you first on this. James Bishop IV, what do the Bonnies need to do to maybe not stop him, but try to contain him a little bit?
You got to be able to play your best defense and put a lot of pressure on him to take those early shots so he can probably get tired out right away. Because this is not a guy you want to leave open. He's had 44 points against Hofstra earlier this season, which is the most by a GW player since the team joined the A10 a while ago. And he's really a guy that is a real reason why George Washington is one of the highest ranked offenses in the conference. He might win A10 Player of the Year. And the Chad Vetting, Moses Flowers, they need to be able to bring their best defense. They need to be able to put pressure on him to make those early shots and not let him run wild like he did against George Mason or any other team.
Absolutely. And Louie, you kind of touched on this. The George Washington offense, it's a really high-powered one led by James Bishop IV. Jaeline, I'll go to you. How do the Bonnies contain that offense as a whole?
I think something that they need to do is really contest the three-point. George Washington is ranked number 1, as Louie said, in scoring. They average 76.2 per game, and a lot of that is coming from beyond that three-point line. And something that Bonaventure tends to do is get lost within like calling his man whenever there's a driving play and a kick out. That's something that they really need to do. Communicate a lot more and just contest that three, because that's where they're gonna get caught with scoring.
Yeah, I think James Bishop's a real threat to kind of get into those gaps, penetrate the lane, and make plays for others that way. But a major focal point for the Bonnies defensively is going to be defending that three-point line. Now the Bonnies, one of the things that they do really well is defend the three. They rank 8th in the entire nation. That's the entire nation, everybody, in defending threes, forcing opponents to get their points from inside the arc. George Washington, not particularly a great three-point shooting team, but the Bonnies must capitalize in every area possible in this game Sunday. So Louie, I want to go to you first. A key for the Bonnies to bounce back against GW.
A key to this is they need to be able to play strong 3 points. It has been a bit costly for them, but you also got to consider the mistakes they made. Some things like turnovers that could really, committing a lot of turnovers early can really mess up a player's mindset for the rest of the game. And you got to be able to not get a lot of fouls, even if some of them a lot of them might be questionable or not, but you got to be able to avoid the fouls. You got to be able to avoid the turnovers, especially you got to be able to avoid those things early. If you avoid those mistakes early and be in the right mindset and get off to a good start, the Bonnies might be able to get the win against GW.
Yeah, I think turnovers are a huge area of improvement for this team. Specifically last week against Duquesne, 4 first-half points in the half court. The rest of the points that Duquesne got in that half off turnovers. They didn't fix it in the second half, led to another loss. Jaeline, I want to go to you now. What's a key for the Bonnies to bounce back?
I'm going to continue building off this turnover aspect. We can see whenever there's a turnover, there's sometimes the guys tend to beat themselves up. They don't tend to not get back. Communication then starts to deplete within them. And I think that's just something like not even just like statistically, like mentally and physically, they need to learn how to like balance that out when it comes to turnovers, but also like getting back, knowing how to score and put a point in the basket for the next team.
Yeah, I think a young team can struggle with turning the ball over a little bit, maybe getting the jitters, who knows. But this team's got enough experience. You kind of question why they're making some of those mistakes, but I think it's all a learning process. It's all about this team growing and developing through that. But speaking of the Bonnies as a team and as a whole, their bench has been a big factor in their success this season. Last year, we had the Ironman 5 2.0, fantastic. The guys were great starting lineup. And this year, fantastic as well, but the bench, really a big booster for this group. They have a deep bench and they use about 9 players in the rotation. They recently moved Moses Flowers into the starting lineup, but still, Anwar Malouk, Brett Rumpel, and Barry Evans, they've all played very well in relief of the starters this year and have had their moments. Louie, I'll go to you next. Who's going to be a key player off the Bonnies bench in this matchup?
I think a key player from off the bench is Brett Rumpel. He just had a career-high 18 minutes played against Duquesne last Saturday where he put up 5 points. We've also seen his potential as a playmaker against UMass in December, having 3 assists. He's able to get through in the paint to provide his teammates opportunities. So I think giving him, and as he's going to be gaining a larger role throughout the rest of the season, I think it's definitely a huge key, and hopefully that starts this Sunday against GW.
Absolutely. I think having another ball handler for this group, especially a guy who's been around the program before. Rumpel was here last year learning under Kyle and Jared and those guys. Having him around definitely helps Kyrell in the backcourt. And now, Jaeline, I want to go to you. A big player just in the whole team. What Bonnies player needs to have a big game on Sunday?
I think someone who needs to have a big game is Jan Farrell. You know, we're going to obviously see the typical Chad Venning, Daryl Banks III, Kyrell Luke scoring. That's typical we're going to see. But I think Jan Farrell, him shooting his 3 points that we know that he's capable of shooting, is something that is going to be a very vital and significant thing for this GW win. He's just another player that's on the court that is also dangerous. He's someone that can move around with their starting 5 that is also like Moses, can shoot the ball very well, and that can also take away from Kyrell, Daryl, and Chad from scoring.
Yeah, I think he's so effective in a playmaking role in addition to his shooting. When Jan Farrell plays well, feels like the Bonnies play well, doesn't it? Yeah, I think he's going to be a key on Sunday. Moving on to the A10 standings. Now, the Bonnies are knotted up with a bunch of teams in these standings, but at the top we have VCU #1. Looks like they might be the favorite to win the A10. The surprise of the year right after them, the Fordham Rams, sitting there at 9-4 in conference play. Moving down the line, Dayton, St. Louis, and Duquesne to round out the top 5, and then the Bonnies sitting at #9 right behind George Mason and St. Joe's. George Washington #10, so a battle of the 9 and 10 teams this weekend in the Riley Center, and then UMass, Loyola, Chicago rounding out those A10 standings. Definitely a very competitive conference. Maybe not as good as many people anticipated, but definitely a competitive conference this year. So the double bye for the Bonnies, Louie. Maybe it's not as within the realm of possibilities we thought this time a week ago or a little bit before that, but they're still looking for a path to get to a good spot for those quarterfinals or second round games. How do they do that?
Anthony, there's really only one way that can happen, is that they need to win out while all the teams above them have to lose. When you look into the teams that are above them, we don't even play them anymore at any more games against them this season. The only guy we haven't played yet was St. Joseph's. They're all ahead. We're down at #9. If we want to get into a double bye, we have to win out for the rest of the season, and they are all going to have to start going into a slump, and we just don't know, but hey, anything can happen.
Yeah, so Louie, you kind of laid out the scenario for the Bonnies to move back up in the ranks there. Jaeline, do you think the Bonnies can do that?
Of course, I think so. Like Louie was saying, the rest of these games are necessary wins. Davidson and UMass for the rest of these games are below us in rankings, so that's a bit of a confidence booster that they'll probably need. But like Louis said, heading into this GW game and St. Joe's, that's a key thing. Like as we saw in the graphics, that it is a necessary win. From 5th to the 11th seed is very close in the like neck and neck, and I just think that is something that they really need to win going forward.
Yeah, I think the Bonnies definitely need to hold on to their spot. And Louie, you brought up the point that they don't really have any games against teams above them in the rankings, but all the teams that they play remaining, George Washington, Davidson, St. Joe's, and UMass, all below them. So maybe on one side, maybe you can't win and move up that way, but you take care of business against some very winnable teams, with all due respect, and then rely on the A-10 to do what it's done the whole year and just beat up on itself, and maybe that's the way that the Bonnies move up towards the end of the year. We're about to get out of here, but before we go, we want to make some final predictions. So, Louie, I'm going to go to you first. Bonnies versus Colonials, Riley Center, 2 o'clock on USA Network. Tell me who you got this weekend.
Anthony, I never usually try and go against the Bonnies, but, just seeing how bad they've been struggling, especially against teams like LaSalle, Duquesne, and Fordham, the losses they had, I think even on the best days, this game is going to be a shootout, especially with James Bishop. We got to make sure he does not go wild. But I think I could imagine the Colonials slightly pulling out the win against the Bonnies, going 75-69.
Going against the home team, Louie. That's a tough pick, but I mean, it's last 3 games, losing 3 in a row, it doesn't really give you a lot of confidence. So, Jaeline, I'll go to you next.
Well, I think it's also going to be a close game, but I'm going in favor of Bonnies, of course. Like we all are discussing, this is just going to be a necessary win. I think the guys will notice that and they'll understand the pressure, but they will step up. Eventually, I think the final score will be 77-73 Bonnies win.
All right, so you guys kind of put the pressure on me now. We're deadlocked 1-1 with the Bonnies for Jaeline, and Louie, you got the Colonials. I got the Bonnies in this one. I think that might be a little bit close early, but I think the Bonnies are going to have a big game Sunday. Lethal shooter Chris Matthews will be in the house for St. Bonaventure. I think the homecoming weekend, the 80s weekend, is going to create a really good atmosphere, and I think the Bonnies respond. Mark Schmidt's clubs always know how to respond at this time of the year. We thought they had that response against VCU and Richmond and Dayton and those of the like, but I see a big game for the Bonnies. I got them winning this one 75-59 in dominant fashion, sending a statement before we get to March and close out the season. And that's all we have today for Bonnies Basketball Now. For Louie Genovese, Jaeline Valdez, I'm Anthony Goss. Go Bonnies.